Hello class, welcome to Illustrator Lab 1. Today we are going to discuss how to open an Illustrator file, your artboard, how to get tools, control, and windows, what vector objects are, what fill and stroke do, layers and groups, your selection tool, transforming objects, and arranging objects. You're going to need one file today. It is illustratorintro.ai. That means that it is an Adobe Illustrator file. All right, once you have it downloaded, you should have a screen like this. You might have more on your screen. It's very unlikely that you'll have less on your screen. But I want to talk to you about how to get more of your program working for you if you start from this point. Right here we have our tab that tells us we are in our Illustrator intro file. In order to get our tools, we can come up here to Window and select a toolbar. I would like you to select the advanced toolbar. If you have a toolbar, it might be the basic one. So go ahead and change this anyways to the advanced just to be sure. All right, these are your tools for the program. We'll go over a lot of them throughout the course. Now let's get our control. Now control is going to be a huge space up here at the top that's going to give us some ways to edit selections a little bit more carefully. So we're going to come up to Window and Control. All right. And it could show up a little bit like this. It might have different values and different things selected from the menu. Next, much like in Adobe Photoshop, we want to have our Layers window open. So you're going to come up here to Window and then down to Layers. You notice in this file there are 3 layers. We'll go through each of them. All right, the white space in front of you is your artboard. All right, the artboard is your kind of working space. You can work off to the side of it, which is a real good strength of Illustrator, but most of what you're going to ever export, images that you're trying to create, will happen on the artboard. You can have multiple artboards. You can also change their location and size in the document by coming over here on your toolbar to what's called the Artboard tool. Selecting that will give you a bounding box around your artboard. It will tell you, now that you have your control bar up, the width and height of the artboard as well. All right, you can resize it by dragging down corners. You can move it by clicking and dragging inside of it. For now, let's just leave it alone, but that's how to get to your artboard tool and edit that size. All right, in order to leave the artboard tool, we're just going to hit our selection tool, which is hotkey V. It is our black arrow tool, the very topmost tool on our toolbar. It's going to be kind of our powerhouse selection tool. All right, so you may notice that we have a number of circles on this layer. All right, this layer is called example circles. Now we can unview the layer by clicking on that eyeball. We can also lock the layer, which would which would prevent us, if I get back to my selection tool, prevent us from moving or selecting anything in the layer. All right, so that's what those locks mean, and that's what that eyeball means, to view, unview a layer, or to lock it so that you disable the ability to edit. Let's keep it unlocked for now. All right, with your selection tool loaded, let's take a look at the first of these objects right here. Go ahead and click in the center of this circle. Now what you're going to get is a green box around the object. All right, everything inside of Illustrator is called an object. Objects are made of anchor points and paths. So in raster programs you have pixels, and they're arranged in such a way that creates an image. In Illustrator we have anchor points and paths. And anchor points and paths added together equal an object. If we want to see our anchor points and paths individually, we can switch from our object selection tool, this black arrow key, to our white arrow key, which is called the direct selection tool. It's hotkey A. Now you'll see, I'll zoom in here, that this object has 4 green squares and this very thin green line that connects them. The squares are your anchor points. The line between them is the path. Right, paths connect anchor points. And all together they equal an object. All right, with your white arrow tool, you can actually select individual objects, or excuse me, individual anchor points. A little slip of the tongue there. And you can see that each of these anchor points has a couple of handlebars. This is information that tells the path how to turn. All right, we'll go more into that in the next lab, but I want you to know that everything is made up of anchor points, paths, and handlebars. All right, all objects in an Illustrator document, I'm going to zoom out, have different properties, what they're made of. So all of these have very different properties, but what is in common is that the properties are defined by fill and stroke. If I select this object, I want you to look down here on your toolbar, and you're going to have a full box and then something of like an empty box, like a donut box, all right, that has an empty space in the middle. The full box is called the fill. It's what goes inside of a path. All right. The stroke, the kind of empty box, follows the path as a stroked line. So the stroke follows the path, the fill occurs inside the path. All right, so this object that we've selected has both a fill and a stroke. To select either one, to change it, eventually you'll have to bring it forward of the other on your toolbar. You can do this also just by hitting hotkey X. Just tapping the X key will toggle which one is forward at all times. All right, next let's select this other object. You'll notice that you can't click in the center of this circle to select it. That is because, let's now select on the line, this object has no fill. It has a stroke, but no fill. We can't select by clicking on no fill. There's nothing to select. All right, now our first object had a stroke that occurred outside of the path. You'll notice that all of the gray stroke is on the outside of that green path. In our next example, all that stroke occurs on the inside of our path. That is something that you can change as a property of your object. Now, why are they green? Why do we have a green anchor point and green path? That is because that is the color of our, look, I accidentally got all this extra stuff. That is the color of our layer. This layer is green. So if we wanted to change that, I believe we could just double click on the layer itself, not necessarily on the text because it'll want you to edit the text. And you can choose any color from this drop-down menu. You can also go to custom and then use a color picking wheel. It's really not incredibly important what color your layer is, as long as you can see the paths and anchor points on top of your objects. If we were working with a bunch of green circles, having green paths and anchor points would be very difficult to see, and so that would be a case where we'd want to change it. That's why these objects are appearing with green anchor points and green paths. It's just an assignment so that you know what layer you're on. All right, the following object, let's talk about more things that we can do. This object has two strokes at once. Now it's hard to see from here because it's only showing us our one stroke. We don't have two stroke icons on our toolbar. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a window, and it's called Appearance. So you're going to click on Window, come down to Appearance. It's probably going to bring up all my extras again. I'll just rip that off. All right, so in Appearance, you will see the properties of any object you have selected. If you have more than one object selected, if I clicked and dragged over both of these with my selection tool, that hotkey V, you'll notice how I get something that says Mixed Appearances. So it can't break it down for you if you have more than one selected. But one will tell us we have a stroke that is 4.999 points wide, that red one. And then we have a dark blue stroke that is 31 and some change points wide. And that is beneath our red stroke. If we wanted to change the order, we want to move this stroke below our blue stroke. Let's see if I can actually get it to happen. You notice we no longer see the red stroke. That's because it's beneath the blue stroke and it is a thinner stroke. All right, so changing the order of things like appearance or changing the order of objects in a layer will determine what you get to see on your screen. and it says that it has no fill. All right, let's go on to the next one. This object has a stroke. This stroke is dashed. Again, it has no fill, so we can't click on the inside of it to select it. We have to select on the path itself. All right, this next one's very interesting. This hasn't happened yet in our lineup. This is also a path, an object with just a stroke and no fill, but our stroke has varied width. So it's not uniform as in the past several examples. This stroke is wider in areas and narrower in others. This we can see happening up here on our control bar with this width profile. You can also see the stroke width at its widest. That is its widest width. All right, along with dashed lines and varying widths, we can also give our strokes styles, brush styles, right here from this drop-down menu. This one is called charcoal. It is from one of our menus. More or less, I just want you to see what it all is possible to do with vector objects. Next, we have something called a pattern brush. So this is still a circle. This object is still made up of, I'm going to switch to my direct selection tool, hotkey A. This is still made up of 4 anchor points and the paths that connect them. But it has what's called a pattern brush, and that's from this drop-down menu as well. Those are all different examples of stroke that you could have in an object. There's many, many ways to mix and match things. I'm going to zoom out here. And then let's talk about this bottom row. This bottom row is full of different kinds of fills. All right, so our stroke was this empty square on our toolbar. Our fill is the full square. Let's select this first fill. You'll notice that this is just a flat gray. This is a single color fill. If I ever wanted to change that color, I could double click right here on the fill and select a new color from this menu. All right, that's the simplest version that fill can be. Next, we have what's a gradient. This is a gradient between a dark red and a light red. And it seems to be going in a linear fashion. It's going in a straight line from dark to light. Next, we have an object with a radial gradient fill. So it goes from a light gray and then radiates outward in somewhat of a circular manner. That's why we get this nice circular change to a dark navy blue. All right, so we had a linear gradient and a radial gradient. Not only can objects have fills with gradients, they can have opacity. So this object goes from a opaque gray to a transparent gray. It goes see-through. Opaque to transparent. And you can see that displayed here in our appearance. All right, next we have another kind of gradient. This one is neither radial nor linear. This is a gradient that has several different spots of color information, and they're all influencing each other the closer that they get. We'll go into an entire gradient lecture in a few different labs. But just so that you don't feel like you are limited to either a straight line or a radiating circle, there are ways to have gradients that are much more marbled. Right next to this fill, we have another flat gray, but instead of the object just coming to the path and stopping, it has a blur applied to it. This is a filter, this is an effect. All right, so this Gaussian blur, so that's why it gets really soft near the path, and it even extends beyond the path. It's kind of feathered out using a kind of blur. So your objects can have effects placed on them as well. Now effects do tend to slow down the computer. The processing power for them is just a little bit more demanding because they are raster effects. Raster is pixel based, whereas all these other objects are vector, which is that anchor point, path, handlebar information. All right, the very last one we have here is an object that looks like it has many objects inside of it. However, this is a pattern. So much like above it was the pattern brush, so the stroke that contained a pattern, this fill contains a pattern. And we can see that, well, it's a little bit hard to tell how very low contrast it is, but that fill on your toolbar will display your pattern. All right, so a lot of these fills had no stroke, and a lot of our strokes had no fill. There's another hidden circle on this artboard that's just below our one with the gradient. So if you go ahead and click and drag your mouse down here, you'll notice we have a circle that has no fill and no stroke. It's essentially invisible. It will never show up in an exported file or in printed imagery. However, if you ever want to find where any object is in an Illustrator file, you're going to use what's called the outline mode. So that is with Command Y. Command Y if you're on a Mac, Control Y if you're on a PC. Now this will show you the location of every bit of vector objects in the layer that you have visible. So notice we don't have these two layers visible, so we won't see those vector objects as well. All right, now to exit the outline mode, we just hit Command Y again. You notice we can no longer see that object of the fill and stroke, but it is still there. Not gone, still there. All right, so our selection tool has allowed us to click on our objects individually, or to click and drag over several, or to click and drag over one hidden one. The selection tool serves to select an entire object or an entire group of objects. Now, groups are a way that you can organize a layer. So let's go to our layer palette and let's expand this top layer. And you notice that it has all of our objects and they're labeled ellipse because that's the tool that was used to create them. And they're all individually on the layer in an order. Let's create some groups. I want you to click and drag over the first 4 objects. And then I want you to use the hotkey Command G. All right, now if you're on a PC, that would be Control G. You'll notice what happened in your layers is you now have something that's called a group. Now if I select one of my circles inside this group, it will select them all with this black arrow tool. All right, they are all essentially married together. If I try to move them, they will stay together. Let's do that again. Let's do this with the next 4. Command G. Again, Control G if you are on a PC. And we have another group. In our layers, you see we have group and group. All right, let's go ahead and select the final 6 here. We're going to leave our invisible one alone. The final 6 and group these objects, Command G. Now these objects are grouped. So our layer now consists of 3 groups, the invisible ellipse, which is hiding out here, and then a rectangle, which is serving as our white background to block out the information behind it. And that white background, you'll notice, is locked. We could select that white background once we unlock it in the layer, and we could delete it. Now we know it's there because if we clicked and dragged, we can see it against the gray background of Illustrator. Kind of hard to tell that there's a white square on a white artboard, unless you really know it's there. All right, we can delete that. All right, so we have groups, and whichever group is on the top of the layer will overlap those that are beneath it. Same thing with the individual objects inside the group. Now what if you wanted to move one of these objects that's inside a group still? You're going to have to switch to your direct selection tool, your hotkey A, that white arrow. You're going to have to select the entire object. Harder to do with an object with stroke because you'll have to select all the anchor points. Let's go ahead and select one of the objects with fill. And you'll notice that you can now move that object inside the group without moving the whole group at once. If you needed to grab an object that had just a stroke, it's harder to do so with this direct selection tool. We're going to have to go ahead and select one of our anchor points, then hold down Shift and select our other 3 in order to move that whole object. If we don't, and we just click on one of the anchor points, when we try to move it with our direct selection arrow, it will just move that one anchor point. All right, a wonderful tool that Illustrator gives us that kind of gives us a workaround of the difference between our black arrow, which is a whole object or whole group, and our white arrow, which is a piece of an object, so like an anchor point or a path or a piece of a group, is called the group selection tool. It is in the family with the direct selection tool. It is the white arrow key with the plus symbol next to it. Now I have gone ahead on my computer and given it its own hotkey. I programmed a hotkey Shift A. I'm going to tell you how to do that right now, and I would like you to do that for the future. Let's go up here to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts, and then here where the group selection tool is showing, yours probably has nothing. I want you to go ahead and type in Shift A on that in this little dialog box and then hit OK. You're going to have to name your new tool selection. Go ahead and name it after yourself or your dog or Disneyland, and then go ahead and hit OK. So now when you hit hotkey, I'll switch out really quick, hotkey V. Now when you hit hotkey Shift A, you'll get what's called the group selection tool. Like I said, this tool is a good medium between our black arrow key, our selection tool, which selects a whole object, or our direct selection tool, which selects pieces and parts. The group selection tool allows us, I'm going to hit Shift A, to select an entire object in a group with one click. And if we double click, it selects the group that it belongs to. Click, click. Single click, double click. But it cannot select a single anchor point and therefore kind of trip you up when you don't mean to move just a single anchor point or piece of path. All right, so you'll use that a lot in the future. Groups and your selection tools. All right, we can go ahead and collapse that layer, and let's discuss the following couple layers. So we're going to unview this layer. Let's lock it, and let's turn that layer off. And then let's view the next two layers. This layer called Pieces has a bunch of vector objects included, and the layer Image has our instructions. All right, so this will be the remainder of the activity, is that we are going to come in here and we are going to use the selection tool, hotkey V, to move, rotate, and scale all objects or groups. It's talking about all of these. These are objects or groups into place below. Holding down Shift while scaling, rotating, or moving will constrain the proportions or direction of movement. Use the bracket keys to bring selected objects or groups forward or backward within the layer. And we have hotkeys Control left bracket and Control right bracket. All right, so let's unlock our Pieces layer. We're going to leave the Image layer locked because we don't need to move anything on there. And let's start exploring. So we need to recreate this image using these pieces that are provided. Some of them are groups. There's more than one object and they are stuck together. We have objects that have fill but no stroke, has an opacity of 35%, which means it's see-through. We have objects that have effects. There's that Gaussian blur again. We have objects that are in groups, but you can see gradients. You can see stroke. All those fun things that we tried. So let's start at the background. Let's build our image from the back up. We'll go over what these instructions meant as we go. So first, if I look at my image, I see that we have that fun pattern back behind what seems to be almost all the pixel information. So I'm going to look for my square, my rectangle that has the pattern in it. This one right here. All right. In order to move it, I'm just going to select it with hotkey V, and I'm going to bring it into my little box where I'm recreating the image. I'm going to line up my top left corner. And now I want to make this bigger. I can do so by clicking and dragging on the bounding box, the corner of the bounding box, but you'll notice if I just drag it organically, I can squash and stretch things, and we don't want that. So this is where that instruction comes in to hold down the Shift key, and it will constrain the proportion while I'm scaling my object. All right, and I'm going to let go of my click before I let go of my Shift key so that it continued to hold those proportions true. Next, I will notice that my pattern is facing the wrong direction. This pattern seems to be stacked vertically. This one's going horizontally. So I'm going to rotate my object by hovering my cursor, my selection tool cursor over the corner of my bounding box until I get this little icon that looks like a pair of rotating arrows. If I click and begin rotating, again, organically I can rotate it any amount that I like, but I would like to constrain this. I want it to go exactly to that 0 degrees, but without me having to eyeball it. So I'm going to hold down Shift again, and you'll notice that Shift gives you 45-degree rotations. It snaps to those. I let go of my click before I let go of my key. All right, now that this is in place, I know that there's a big radial gradient, the see-through gradient over the top of it, and I'm fairly certain it's this one right here. So I'm going to bring this object down in front of my pattern. Do the same thing. I'm going to hold down Shift while I transform, while I scale that square. We are on our way. All right, so 2 objects down. And because this has a gradient that has a transparent center, we're seeing through it to the pattern behind it. All right, I think next is probably these gentle rocky mountain shapes. So let's select these shapes. Let's select both of them at the same time. So you hold down Shift to select multiple groups, and we'll bring them down into our artboard. Now, we're about to have a problem where now we can no longer select the object. We deselect, we can't click on it and select it because our radial gradient square is in front. All right, if we open up this layer, here's all of the different groups and pieces, all the objects that make up this image. And our little gray rocks down here are beneath our rectangle. All right, in order to change that, we can, inside of the layer palette, select that group of rocks and drag it up above that rectangle with a gradient. You can go collect the other one as well, because the other one's so far behind, it's even behind our rectangle with a pattern. We can also use our bracket keys to move an object forward or backward. So if this is the object selected, you can either select it by clicking inside the circle here or by having the object selected by clicking it on your artboard itself. When it is selected, you can use your bracket keys to send it forward or backward in a layer. So again, that was that Control right bracket or Control left bracket. If you're on a Mac, you're going to use Command plus the bracket. So you'll notice I'm going to hold down my Command key, and then I'm going to tap my left bracket, and I want you to watch what happens to the location of this group in my layer palette. Every time I tap it, it's going to move further back. Every time I tap my right bracket, it's going to move further forward. Now that they're both forward of that gradient, let's place them. And we'll probably have to make them big because it looks like they're not quite so big. Let's maybe eyeball them against the original. Let's place it over that JPEG image and hold down Shift. Remember to constrain the proportions. Hold down Shift. And once they're about the same size that they are in the image, I'm going to hold down Shift while I move them horizontally over into my little working space. All right, let's do the same thing with this one. I don't have the best of place to line it up, so let's just start. Hold down Shift while you enlarge it, while you click on that bounding box. I think I've gone a little bit too big. Or maybe not big enough. Oh, it wasn't big enough. All right, once you get it approximately the right size and right location, let's go ahead and drag it over onto our working space. Hold down Shift if you would like to constrain that movement just horizontally. It'll keep you from dragging it around anywhere. Well, Shift will just kind of snap it to either horizontal or vertical. All right, so that seems to be most of our background placed. Let's grab one more piece before we create a group. Let's grab this piece here, this one that has our kind of Gaussian blur effect. It seems to be doing something of a kind of outer glow shadow on the kitsune running through the torii gate. We're going to bring that down into our artboard. Let's go ahead and, oops, again, we have an order problem. Now, instead of coming into our layers palette to find that object and move it, let's go ahead and go to that outline mode, Command Y, select that object. We'll go to Command Y again, and let's use our bracket tool to bring forward. So Command and right bracket. Let's tap, 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 tap that until it comes up above our radial gradient. All right, I'm going to eyeball its size based on the image next door and its location. It looks like it's the correct size already. I just want to get that location really nice. So once I've placed it on top there, I'm going to hold down Shift and try to eyeball where to let it go inside this square. Maybe based on where it seems to be intersecting the little mountains behind it. That's about all I can really go off of right now. All right, so this is going to be our background. Let's group this so that we no longer have to worry about those pieces getting moved separately from each other. So let's select all those objects, so you're in your hotkey V still. Select all those objects and Command G. All right, next, let's bring in the pieces of the white kitsune. First, we'll grab this group. This group includes the head, chest, and back leg, and the ear. Now, let's double check how big it is, make sure it's okay. So it's about the right size already. Let's place it into our image. Oh, we've got an order problem. Let's go ahead and fix that. Command, right bracket. And let's place that over the shadow. We might need to adjust it later, but go ahead and approximately place it where it's supposed to go. Now, so we're probably going to continue to have the problem where our background is in front of a lot of these pieces. So let's fix that, or let's at least get ahead of ourselves by selecting our background group and moving it to the back of the layer. Now, we could do that by holding down Command and tapping our left bracket one tap at a time until it goes back. We can also hold down Command, or if you're on a PC, Control, and Shift, and then just tap the bracket once, and it will send it all the way to the back in one command. So that Shift is telling it to go all the way, and then our left bracket was telling it to go to the back. We could also bring it, same difference, we could also bring it all the way to the front with Command Shift and then right bracket, and then it goes all the way to the top of the layer. That's not where we want it. Let's put it to the back. So now we shouldn't have too many struggles where all these objects that we drag onto it are going to show up in the wrong place. All right, next let's start bringing in, let's grab a couple of these groups of objects and bring them all down there at the same time so we can kind of be working on a lot at once. All right, we'll zoom in. All right, so we have the back leg that seems to be occurring here. So I'm going to click and drag it. into place. We can double check that it's intersecting that front hind foot about where we want it. It looks like it's pretty good for me. Double check yours. Now the tail is in the wrong direction. The tail in this version is up. So we're going to have to, again, kind of like we rotated the pattern in the back, we're going to have to rotate these tails. We're also going to have to resize them. You notice they're much larger here in our vector objects than they are here in the image. So let's place them over the image and do some resizing to make sure that they're the correct size. So remember to hold down Shift to constrain your proportions. And we'll just do a bunch of moving and rotating, holding down Shift while we resize them until you get a nice little replica of those tails. Once you do, let's drag them into place, into our little work area. We have an order problem where the tails are appearing over the body piece, so we're going to have to use our bracket tool, Command and left bracket, until that group is beneath our body group in the layer. All right, we have an arm, a front arm, and we're going to have to bring that in front, so Command and right bracket. Lots of taps there. And then let's place it so we know that the shadow, this little light gray shadow, kind of comes and turns there in the arm. All right, now we have the back forepaw, and it is rotated differently. So let's rotate that by hovering outside of our bounding box. Placing it. We have two pieces left. We have the eye and the ear. Let's do the ear first because it seems to be fairly simple. If we look at our image, it's just kind of stacked next to, and looks like it's a little bit too large, so we're going to shrink it down, hold down Shift. We don't want it to poke out in front of the forehead. Well, maybe we didn't have to. Let's see, I'll go back. Command Z, Command Z. Maybe we just had to move it a little bit further backwards. Oh, that'll fix it. All right, now that group that includes the eye, let's place that over the forehead and then hold down Shift again to constrain the proportions. And place it on the head. Now I think it would be worth grouping our kitsune pieces together, just like we grouped our background. So we can't click and drag over just the kitsune at this point because our background is still active. We can still accidentally select it. So let's lock the background. So you're going to select it, and we're going to come over here to our layer, and where it is in the layer, which should still be at the back, let's go ahead and hit that lock. Now if we click and drag over kitsune, we can group that without accidentally selecting the locked piece. Command G. Again, if you're on PC, that's Control G. When I say Command, you hear Control. All right, next we have to build the Torii gate. Let's select all these little objects here. Let's bring them down closer to where we want to be working. Select multiple objects by clicking and dragging. Remember not to resize them by accident while you are doing that. All right, let's put our first building block here. And then we have a couple of pieces. Let's see, we have a second layer to that block. Now if we eyeball these three, you can kind of figure that it's not going to be this one. This one's a little bit too wide. This one's probably a little bit too small. And this one feels like Goldilocks. This one's just right. And we'll place it here. Let's do its counterpart on the other side. Just a lot of clicking and dragging. Uh-oh, so now we have an order problem. This one's appearing behind the block, so we're gonna have to use our bracket tool and bring it forward. All right, next it looks like we have a couple of cylindrical pieces. Got two that look likely. Probably the smaller one is the one further in the background. Place this one here. And this one here. And I'm just lining up where it seems like the shadow, the dark red shadow turns into the dark gray shadow on the image. Now if you're having problems putting things exactly where you want, maybe they're kind of snapping around to like invisible areas, you're not quite sure why you can't move things very easily, you might have something turned on called snaps. So if we come up to here to view, we have a bunch of, we have snap to grid, snap to pixel, snap to point, snap to glyph. I don't want you to have any of those on right now. They can be useful if you're working on something that is very mathematical and has a grid. But go ahead and click on any of these that have a little check mark next to them so that they are unchecked, so that they don't prevent you from putting objects where you want to in the artboard. Okay, let's continue building this gate. Next we have our two poles. Now we've got an order problem here where this one is behind the pieces in the layer. So let's go ahead, let's just bring this one all the way to the front, so that using that shift key again, Command Shift, right bracket, pops it all the way to the front. And then we'll place it. And then I'm looking for another one of these and I don't see one. And the reason I don't see it is because it's not vertical. It's actually here, but it's been turned. So again, we're going to need to rotate it by hovering our cursor over a corner, rotating. And if you hold down Shift, it will constrain those rotates to 45 and 90-degree angles. And then you can place it with hotkey V. All right, we're getting there. We're almost done. Just got a couple pieces left. Looks like we've got a cross beam here. Oh, that's what this looks like. The little highlight on the wood above it. All right, this is almost in the right order. It's hiding behind this pole, but it needs to be appearing above this one, and see how it's hiding. So we're going to have to change the order of these objects again. Let's go ahead and push this object back using our bracket key until it's hiding. Now you notice we have a couple things that are out of order now. So let's group these three pieces of our base, Command G, and we can move them all at the same time. Since they're in the right order to each other, we can group them. Let's do the same over here in case it happens again. Command G. Now we can move all of those at the same time. If you ever need to ungroup objects, like you only grouped them just for some quick utility, you can right-click and ungroup anything that's grouped. I believe you can also do so in the layer palette. So a few more pieces. Let's get our two continuations of that bar placed here. All right, we're going to have to reorder that using our bracket key. And here's our little hidden background. That one doesn't seem to be overlapping. It might be in the right order already. It is! Yay! Lucky us. Go ahead and line it up so that it feels as though this bottom timber continues into it. I've just got a couple more pieces left. So we've got some cap pieces. I have to bring those forward on the layer. And it looks like we're gonna have to bring this down a little bit. If you notice how much shadow is showing underneath it, it's not as much as I put right there. All right, we'll do our little counterpart. I'm gonna have to reorder that in the layer. Now it's okay that some of this is peeking out because it looks like we're going to put an object that covers both of them in front. I believe it is this one. So we'll go ahead and line it up and then move it to the front of the layer, Command Shift, and right bracket. We'll grab our final piece here. Now this one's upside down, so we're going to have to rotate it. Hold down Shift and rotate. And place that in the very front. Command Shift right bracket. And then our final piece is the little cast shadow beneath the gate and the kitsune. So let's place it maybe over here under this far side of the gate and hold down Shift while we resize it to keep those proportions. Keep the ratio of the height to width the same. And then we've done it, I think. Let's see, this looks like maybe we need a little adjusting size-wise. I think what needs to happen is our cross, well, yours might be more correct than mine, but I think mine needs to come up just a little bit further because there's a gap. Make any last little changes that you can, and then call it great. All right, so now you've kind of learned things about layers, groups, selection, fill, stroke, all the different possibilities. And that'll prepare you really well for Illustrator Lab 2. Save your file. I'll see you later.